Hello, I'm David Cottrell. I'm the Health and Safety Officer for the college. This is Fire Marshal training, and this will constitute as your training as a Fire Marshal. At the end of this presentation, you will learn about fire safety legislation, the sources of ignition and fuel, Fire Marshal duties, and the different types of fire extinguisher. Statistics from UK Gov, and the latest ones I can find are 2017-2018. When it comes to fires in educational premises, there were 682 fires, and out of those fires, 540 were accidental and 142 were deliberate, which goes to show that fires do start through malicious causes and not just by accidental purposes. Within the workplace, we have the Health and Safety at Work Act 1974. That is a far-reaching piece of health and safety legislation, and it does encompass all types of work undertaken within the workplace. It is an enabling act and it's primary legislation, but what it does state that the place you're working must be safe. Also, we have the Regulatory Reform Fire Safety Order. This is specifically for fire only, and this does put the onus on the responsible person has having overall responsibility to the building. If there was a fire, or if there was a dangerous occurrence, or a near miss that could have been a big fire, and it's investigated by the fire service, the responsible person would be the person that they'd be going for in court initially. Also, the Act also requires the fire risk assessment to be completed for the building. Fire risk assessment is normally completed by me. What it does, it looks at all the possible causes of a potential fire within that workplace. It looks at how it's controlled. If there is if any deficiencies are highlighted during the fire risk assessment, then this is put into an action plan, and then the action plan is worked on with a timescale for completion. The fire service have many powers for enforcement. If they wanted to, and they felt sufficient cause to do so, they could put a prohibition notice on the building. This would immediately shut the building. Also, they could also give an enforcement notice, which requires work to be done to rectify the issues they have found. They don't generally go for prosecution straight away, but if they do, then this can have major repercussions on the actual company. But to do a prosecution, it normally means that we have failed in our duty of care for our staff and students, and in which case we have made the building in an unsafe way, and by doing so, prosecution is normally a method of dealing with that occurrence. As part of the fire safety management, we must nominate people to undertake special roles. This is normally through having fire marshals who can sweep through the building and ascertain if any people have been left in the building. Also, we have evacuation chair operatives who can work the evacuation chair. We must ensure that somebody is competent enough to undertake the fire risk assessment. We must have means of efficiently contacting the emergency services and ensure that employees and others cooperate with each other. As a company, we must consider everybody who's in the workplace, not just staff and students, but also contractors, and if people are in wheelchairs or have walking impairments or have other forms of disability, they must also be taken care of, and we must have provision to ensure they can safely exit the building upon the activation of a fire alarm. We must ensure that we have fire marshals assigned for every area of the building. Also, the fire marshals we do have assigned must have good knowledge of their area of responsibility, and this involves the route they take when the fire alarm sounds. Some fire marshals only have to walk one corridor, while other fire marshals have to walk several floors. But as part of this training, the fire marshals will have had a walk around with me of their fire marshal route. For fire to actually start, there needs to be three elements. Oxygen is one of them. Obviously, we can't do without oxygen. It's always going to be around in the environment. There also needs to be a heat source, and there also needs to be a fuel source. Once you have all these three elements in place, then fire can start. Fire is spread by four methods. We have convection, we have conduction, we have radiation, and we have direct heat. We'll look at each one of these now. Radiation. Thermal radiation occurs when heat is transferred from one object to another through the air without direct contact. Think of the sun warming your skin, or think of a barbecue. When a fire actually does occur in a building, the heat can be so intense, up to 1,200 degrees, then heat will transfer from one part of the building to another just through the heat exchange. If you're stood near a fire, you'll certainly feel the effects from the heat. Convection. This is where heat rises up to the ceiling space. The air becomes very, very hot, and as the heat rises, smoke will start to form on the ceiling, and the smoke will then start to drop slowly down to the ground level. This is a major cause of fire spread throughout the building. Conduction. Conduction is where heat transfers through a conductive solid. This is, for example, can be metal. Within a building, if you do have metal beams that run through the building, obviously the heat can transfer through those and then can spread throughout the building itself. Think of conduction as a metal saucepan with a metal handle. If you touch that handle with the heat warming the saucepan, then you'll feel the transfer of heat to the handle. That is conduction. We'll now look at sources of ignition and sources of fuel. As a fire marshal, it's always good practice to be mindful of what's around you, even when you're in your own office or workshop environment, or if you're navigating the building. There's many sources of ignition within the workplace. However, most or if not all sources of possible ignition are strictly controlled. Certainly, arson is one of the sources of ignition that we can't particularly do anything about other than having good security measures in place. But when it comes to other sources of ignition that we can control, smoking is certainly one of those. Faulty or misused electrical equipment, broken switches, overloaded sockets or bar plugs, cables unwound, cables placed under carpets which can overheat, convector heaters, especially where they've got defective feet, or they're left near to paper or ignition sources. Halogen lamps produce a lot of heat. And when it comes to the kitchen, obviously you've got cooking, which is certainly a source of ignition. And when it comes to the mechanical components and plants and equipment, and certainly hot works, then obviously that is further sources of ignition. As a fire marshal, just be mindful of the different sources of fuel that you may come across. Items such as propane gas are normally well managed by the departments. They're normally housed in flammable cabinets and used under supervision. Also, items such as paints and white spirit, etc., are also well managed by the departments themselves and are generally kept in locked cabinets. If you do see something that is of concern to you, certainly if you see large amounts of waste that have been left for long periods of time, for example, then just let either myself know or estates know, and then we can get that attended to. There will always be sources of oxygen in the workplace, primarily because we need it to survive. However, additional oxygen, such as oxygen cylinders, can be brought into the workplace for various tasks, in which case these have to be strictly controlled by risk assessment, and generally the fire service also needs to be aware as well. We now look at some of the most common causes of fire in the workplace. Faulty equipment. As a fire marshal, just be mindful of the any electrical equipment that has a potential to cause fire, and this could be from damaged cables or items that actually look broken, have broken casings. Ensure that the item has been pat tested, which is an electrical test that I carry out every year on every piece of equipment. The only caveat is computers. They normally get done, I think it's every 3 years. If you do see a defect, then either report it to myself or just email or go and speak to estates. These are some pictures of damaged electrical equipment. You can see with the plug, you can see the inner core exposed. Also the wire has damaged inner core as well. The plug socket has a cracked casing. If you see any of these during your duties, then just email myself or the estates team, or just give me a call and we'll go down and get it attended to straight away. Another cause of fire in the workplace is the misuse of electrical equipment. Items such as microwaves and kettles can easily be overloaded into a bar plug or block plug, and this then can put lots of a big surge on that power cable. Also, vacuum cleaners can be used to suck up wet liquids, or certainly tin foil can be put into microwaves, which can cause arcing. Cables can be kept under carpet where they get overheated, so always be mindful that the equipment is being used safely and properly. This is a typical convector heater that we do have in the college. I have come across several of these heaters before that have not been particularly safe in the way they've been looked after. Always make sure that both feet are secured to the actual base of the actual heater. I have found loose or if not missing feet in the past. Always make sure the heater is switched off when the classroom or room is being vacated. Always make sure that items that are combustible aren't kept in front of the heater, and also that the power lead is not causing a trip hazard by going across the floor. As a fire marshal, if you do come across any deficiencies with the heaters, then just either let me know or the estates team know. Overloading plug sockets is another cause of potential fire. One of these pictures is from Highbury College and the other one isn't. I'm not saying which one's which, but yeah, just be mindful that power cables should not be overloaded in bar plugs. If they are, then obviously disconnect them and request for an extra socket to be fitted. And you can tell if an item is going to overload a bar plug by going to electricalsafetyfirst.org.uk, load up the electrical calculator, and then you can slide the actual items onto the bar plug and then ascertain if it would cause an overload. Yeah, this is something that we need to avoid. And as a fire marshal, if you do come across electrical appliances that have been plugged into bar plugs, then let the estates team or health and safety know, because this is potentially a hazard waiting to happen. If this is happening because there's a lack of plug sockets, then the solution will be to install extra plug sockets and not just leaving a daisy chain across the floor. Again, as mentioned previously, if you do have a cable reel, then always make sure it's fully unwound before plugging into the plug socket. If the cables aren't fully unwound, then the actual cables can overheat and then they can cause burning, which then is a potential fire hazard. One area you do need to control is waste. If we do have large quantities of waste to be collected, then it'll be a case of speaking to the Estates Department and getting it removed. If a fire does occur, waste such as paper, etc., will catch alight quite easily and will exacerbate any fire that's occurred. These pictures are some examples I've come across at Highbury College of waste. If we do get a build-up of waste, then this potentially is a hazard, so it's a case of reporting it to the Estates Department and getting it collected as soon as possible. Another common cause of fire in the workplace is arson. At Highbury College we do have measures in place to try and prevent unauthorised access to our buildings, such as locking doors, having perimeter fencing, CCTV, alarm systems, external lighting. However, people who are intent on causing fire generally can't access buildings, so it's always good to be mindful of who's around you and what they're doing, and if they look a little bit suspicious, then obviously report it to the Estates Department or myself. Fire doors are really important to a building's fire safety. If a fire door is left open, then if a fire occurs within that compartment, then fire doors will allow fire and smoke to spread to the next fire compartment. This picture does demonstrate how effective fire doors can be. The picture on the top is of the other side to where the fire was. The picture on the bottom is where the fire was. You can see how well the fire doors held back the fire. If them fire doors were breached or were left open, then the fire would have spread straight through to the staircase and into other parts of the building. This is an example of what we need to avoid. This is a blocked fire route. I took this photo some time ago when I was doing a fire risk assessment in a school. Fire routes always need to be clear to enable the flow of people to safely evacuate the building. If fire routes are blocked, as a fire marshal, if you could just let the estates team or myself know what you've seen, and then we'll get it attended to. For a fire door to be fully effective, it is important that all parts of the fire door are correctly sealed. As you can see in this picture, there is quite a large gap between both door leaves. If a fire did occur within this environment, then smoke and fire would quite easily spread through between both doors. The estates team do spend some time every month checking all fire doors. However, as a fire marshal, if you do see a door that has identified deficiencies, then please let either myself know or the estates team. Missing ceiling tiles are another way that smoke can spread for the building's ceiling cavities. If you do see missing ceiling tiles, then just put a job on the hub to the estates team and then we can get them put in place. One area we need to be mindful of is fire extinguishers being used as door stops. It is not very often I do see this happening, but as a fire marshal, if you do see a fire extinguisher being used as a door stop, then please replace the extinguisher to its rightful location and let me know, and I'll make some inquiries to find out why it happened. Another method we have to prevent fire spread from one compartment to the other is to use fire stopping. This is used where services pass through from one compartment to the other. Fire stopping is normally in the form of a type of mastic or a foam that is sprayed around to prevent the smoke and fire passing through. Items that are flammable, such as propane gas canisters, white spirit, certain varnishes and paints, should all be stored safely in locked flammable cabinets when not being used. This is really important because if a fire did occur in a particular department, where the items weren't stored safely, then this would be a major cause of fire spread. As a fire marshal, when you're doing your fire sweeps for the building, if you do come across a fire door that's been wedged open for ventilation purposes due to COVID, if you could just close the door on your way through, that'd be really, really good. One of the biggest dangers of fire is smoke. Now, if the building's got good compartmentation, then the smoke should not go past the fire door, but it doesn't take very long at all. I mean, within a minute for an area to build up completely with smoke, and in which case you'd find it very, very difficult to work your way out. As you can see in the bottom left photo, the people are crouching down because with like convection, smoke will initially rise to the ceiling and slowly come down. So being on your hands and knees and working your way through the building is the best way to get out. If when you're sweeping a building you come across smoke, then just turn the other way and move away from the smoke situation. The compartmentation doors should hold back smoke anyway, and the doors should normally prevent smoke and fire spread for about 30 minutes. Depending on what smoke's burning, certain gases can be produced, and some gases like cyanide can render you unconscious in about two breaths, so always be mindful of smoke and the dangers of it. We need about 21% of oxygen to function effectively. During a fire situation, the fire will consume the oxygen within that environment, and the more the fire grows, the more oxygen will be consumed by the fire situation. So the best course of action within any fire situation is to get out as quick as possible. Most fatalities and injuries are not caused by flames. So what are the dangers? Well, excessive heat. Within a fire situation, temperatures can range from between 500 degrees to 1100 degrees. There's also the risk of smoke inhalation and also lack of oxygen. So what are the fire precautions at Highbury College? First of all, we have smoke detection. Virtually every space within the college has either smoke or heat detection. Upon one detector being activated, the whole building will sound. We have effective compartmentalisation, where fire doors will divide one compartment from another. We have fire retardant materials. We have fire extinguishers for every part of the building. We have emergency lighting, which means upon the main lighting going, we have backup lighting in place. We separate our ignition and fuel sources. We have maintenance in place, and all the fire detection and all the fire systems we have in place are all under a planned preventive maintenance scheme. Also, the caretakers do their weekly or monthly checks as well to make sure everything is functioning as it should be. And also we have you, the fire marshals, the eyes and the ears of fire safety around the college. Fire precautions. We have to make sure that corridors and stairwells are kept clear of any obstruction, especially combustible materials. We have to make sure highly flammable liquids are kept to a minimum and stored safely, ideally outside the building or within flammable cabinets. We have to make sure electrical sockets are not overloaded, and we have to make sure we have good security in place. Fire drills. We do undertake fire drills every term. Currently at the moment, because of COVID, the fire drills are undertaken by the lecturer walking the students to the assembly point. But under normal times we'd have fire drills. You'd get notified before a fire drill commences, as this is your chance to practice your walkthrough of the building. We have housekeeping in place. We have caretakers and myself walking through the buildings, and where we do see deficiencies, we get these attended to as soon as possible. We have emergency procedures in place. We have personal emergency evacuation plans in place. This is where somebody who can't use a staircase because of mobility issues gets their own plan wrote So when the fire alarm does activate, then that person will know exactly where to go to, which is normally to a refuge point. And then if necessary, we'll use the evacuation chair to get that person out of the building. We have fire action notices. Every room will have a fire action notice indicating the assembly point to go to and what to do upon the fire alarm sounding. And also we have fire awareness training. This is what we are doing now. As we just mentioned previously, this is a typical example of a fire action notice. It tells a person what to do upon seeing a fire or hearing a fire alarm. Within Highbury College, we do have personal emergency evacuation plans currently in place. As mentioned before, these are for people with walking impairments who would find it very difficult or unable to use the staircase in the event of a fire alarm. What would normally happen is I'd be notified and would go in with a simple plan for this student or staff member. This plan will be shared with fire marshals and with the lecturers. Upon the activation of a fire alarm, the person would know where to go, which would normally be in a compartmentalised stairwell. Within Highbury campus, we do have communication points on each stairwell where you can talk to one of the fire marshals on the ground floor. And what would happen then is, if it was a false alarm, the person would get notified and would be told to stay put. If it was an actual fire or an unknown cause of the fire alarm, then trained evacuation chair operatives would then take that person down the stairs in the evacuation chair. If you do come across anybody with a walking impairment, then certainly let me know, and I'll then make sure an emergency evacuation plan is developed. This is a typical example of a refuge point within the Highbury campus. As you can see on the right hand photo, the communication point is there. This is quite a simple device to use and will provide simple communication with the fire team on the ground floor. As a fire marshal, when you're sweeping the building, you may have people with peeps in place within your sweep through. If you do see somebody within the stairwell, just stop briefly to speak to them to make sure they are in communication with the fire team on the ground floor. If they're not, then obviously make somebody aware when you finish your sweep on the ground floor. This is why it's really important to ensure fire doors are kept closed. Now, in this example of a stairwell, you'll see that the fire door has been left open and the fire is now transferred into the stairwell. Now, if somebody was waiting in the refuge point to be rescued, then obviously the fire situation for them would be a real health and safety concern. Fire exit signs are in place throughout all parts of the building. These provide the shortest route to the final exit door, and then you need to go to the fire assembly point. Where the fire exit is blocked because of potential smoke, then just reroute yourself to a different direction and you'll pick up on more fire exit signs en route. If you do see any fire exit signs missing or defective in any way, just please let myself or the estates team know and we'll get these attended to. All fire exit routes lead to a final fire exit door. These final fire exit doors should be opened with a single strike action and should never be locked or padlocked. All final fire exit doors should also be signed up indicating how the door is opened, be it push pad to open or push pad to open. As a fire marshal, if you do see any defective signage or defects with the final doors, just let us know and we'll get it tended to as soon as possible. Fire assembly points are designed to keep people away from the building and at a safe location. Your duties as a fire marshal will be to go to your designated assembly point after sweeping the building. You should know what your assembly point is, but if you don't know, then speak to me and I'll let you know. Upon reaching the assembly point, it is also really important to make sure that all people at the assembly point stay at the assembly point and don't start walking towards the building line. If they do, then just keep them back. During the fire alarm process, at some point the fire alarm will be silenced. When the fire alarm is silenced, it doesn't mean it's been reset, it just means it's sounding silently. Some people hear the fire alarm stopped and then they'll start to head for the building thinking it's okay to go back in. It isn't. It's only okay to come back into the building when we've given the all clear. Okay, so as a fire marshal, keep people back at the assembly point until you get notified that it's safe to return back into the building. As a fire marshal, you will not be expected to use a fire extinguisher. Spending valuable time putting out a fire with a fire extinguisher when you haven't been trained to do so can put your life at risk, so I advise not to use one at all. However, I will provide some guidance on how a fire extinguisher is used and what each type of fire extinguisher does. When a fire occurs and a fire extinguisher is used to extinguish a fire, the first thing you need to do is to pull the pin on the fire extinguisher. Aim the nozzle of the fire extinguisher at the base of the fire, squeeze the nozzle and turn from side to side. Highbury College has 5 types of fire extinguisher in place. We'll first of all look at the water fire extinguisher as indicated on the right hand corner of the screen. The water fire extinguisher is used for combustible materials such as paper and wood and puts out the fire by cooling the fire. Water fire extinguishers are red in colour. The next fire extinguisher we're going to look at is the foam fire extinguisher as indicated on the right hand side of the picture. This extinguisher will put out not only combustible materials such as wood and paper, but also flammable liquids such as paint and petrol. This works by cooling and also smothering the fire. The next extinguisher we're going to look at is the powder fire extinguisher. These are indicated by a blue strip on the top half of the extinguisher, as indicated on the right hand corner of the photo. This extinguisher is fairly hazardous to health if used in a confined space. However, it is a very versatile extinguisher and can be used on combustible materials, as well as flammable liquids, as well as flammable gases, as well as flammable metals, and as well as electrical equipment. This works by smothering and forming a barrier between the fuel and the oxygen. The next fire extinguisher we're going to look at is the carbon dioxide extinguisher, as indicated on the right hand corner of the screen. This has a black strip across the top half of the extinguisher. This is used for primarily electrical fires, but can also be used for flammable liquids too. This works by suffocating the fire by removing the oxygen supply. It should not be used in confined spaces as it does remove the oxygen, which can then cause a problem for the person using it. And the final fire extinguisher we're going to be looking at today is the wet chemical extinguisher, as indicated on the right hand corner of the screen. This has a yellow strip across the top half. This is used primarily only for class F fires, which are for deep fat fires, and you generally only find these ones in a kitchen environment. Fire blankets are a really efficient way of putting out pan fires. The first thing to do, however, if a fire is occurring in a pan, is to turn off the heat source. Secondly is to pull the blanket from the actual casing itself and to hold the blanket in the way as shown in the bottom two pictures, and then place the blanket over the actual pan and to leave it there until the pan cools down. This works by smothering the fire and removing the oxygen supply. Now let's look at your fire marshal duties. As a fire marshal, you need to familiarise yourself with your area of responsibility. Now, some fire marshal routes are quite short, where other fire marshal routes are quite long. So it's good practice to walk your fire marshal route every now and then, just to ensure you remember where to go. Upon the activation of the fire alarm, all you need to do is to walk the fire marshal route that you've been given, and to make sure that everybody evacuates the building. You should all have a yellow coat to wear that I've provided you with. If you do not have one or it goes missing, let me know and I'll replace it. As you're walking through the building, if any doors have been left open, then just close them as you walk through. If you do get any problems with people being a bit awkward and wanting to leave quickly, then just report it to me after the event. What should you take note of during your fire marshal sweep? Well, if there's a fire or smoke, then obviously take note of that and report that to the fire team on the ground floor. If any areas are impassable or obstructed, then report that. If any persons have not participated within the fire evacuation by refusing to or quickly leave their office or classroom, then report that. If you do see any injured persons or persons at the refuge point, then report that to the fire team. And also take note of any unusual activities that you may see during your fire marshal sweep. It could be a case that there's been an intruder in the building and they could be the cause of the fire or fire alarm activation. What should you do when you get to the assembly point? We need to make sure that the emergency services have been called if they need to be called. If it's Arundel Street, they will get called automatically. However, with regards to Highbury campus, the Tower or North Harbour, during core hours, then the fire team will have some say on whether the fire service are called or not. We need to make sure everybody is present and accounted for. We need to record any persons that are believed to be missing. We need to make sure the route is clear for the emergency services to turn up. Control persons from returning back into the building. Report to the nominated head fire marshal or lead fire marshal. They would generally come to you, and they are normally wearing orange bibs as well. And take note of any problems that have occurred during your fire sweep. If any issues have occurred, then please report it to either myself or the fire team, and that can be looked at after the event. If the fire service do turn up, then the first thing they do is to head for the fire panel. This is so they can identify the exact location of the fire. They also want to know if all persons have been accounted for. This is why it's important that the fire marshals do report back to the lead fire marshal and to tell us whether their routes have been swept and that all areas are clear. The fire service will then spend time looking at the activation point, just to satisfy themselves that there is no fire present within the building or potential hazard. Then they will then give us the all clear to reset the fire panel. When emergency is over, what should you do? Only allow persons in once it has been confirmed there is no danger. Discuss any lessons learnt with the head fire marshal. Identify any non-compliant staff or students. Organise the replacement of any equipment used, for example fire extinguishers, and thank everyone for their participation. I will have to fill out a fire report upon the activation of each fire alarm, and any deficiencies in the fire process should be reported to me. Then I can look at any remedial measures that need implementing. In summary, the prime objectives of a fire marshal is to prevent loss of life, minimise loss of property and minimise the disruption to Highbury College. For further information and guidance on Highbury College's fire arrangements, please refer to the Highbury College Health and Safety Policy. Appendix D provides you information on the fire safety and evacuation procedure, and Appendix E provides you information on the safe storage and use of liquefied petroleum on college premises. If you've got any further questions, please speak to myself, David Cottrell, and I'll get back to you as soon as possible with the answer. Thank you for listening. Hope you have a good day.